Someone out the window.
Hi, Maggie and Lori.
Oh, they're chatting. So Melanie has requested that we talk about a couple of lines from the Sokuzan Mai, the Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, written in, I think, was the 9th century by Tozan Ryokai, one of the lineage holders in the Soto Zen lineage. And it's like a poem, but it's used as a chant. So just as a reminder, it's the only one we do completely in English. The chant that we do in the evening is the Heart Sutra in English, the Red Pine translation. And so this, close to the end of this, there's lots of images here for Sokuzan Mai, or Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. And towards the end, it says, and I'm reversing this, the stone woman gets up dancing when the wooden man begins to sing. Does that work? No. So what is this idea? The next line is not within the reach of feeling or discrimination. How could it admit of consideration and thought? So the idea here is it's trying to, what Tozan is trying to get across to you is that an image of what awakening would be like using these images, what it would be like for you. So you can use your imagination to imagine what it would be like to see what the Buddha saw. And what did the Buddha see? According to the teachings and according to as far as we know, 2,500 years ago, what comes down to us is the truth, and it probably is. He saw that nothing, any one thing you saw anywhere was not separate from anything else. Separated, but fundamentally not separate. To see that it's impossible to have an enemy. It would be impossible if you have an enemy. It'd be like having your right hand is unhappy with your left hand. You couldn't have an enemy anywhere, because the deep understanding, when you looked around, even if you were being attacked by someone, you would see deeply into that and see that you're not separate from them. So to be able to see that, it would begin to register with you on some level that the motivation behind what they're doing is because they're suffering, they're so unhappy. And quite often when people are unhappy, and we're people, so you can check this out for yourself, we want to blame somebody, or we want to blame something. If you have a difficult emotion or feeling come up, you want to know why. You want to know, why is that? What's that? What can I do about it? What kind of essential oils should I use? And don't misunderstand, I like essential oils. So, but the idea here with working with the awareness in such a way that we can better see, what would it be like? What would it be like to no longer be at odds with anything? And so the image he's using here is when the stone woman gets up dancing. So it's what it's basically saying here is that there's lots of ways of talking about this, and this is just the way that I like to use these images, is that you're completely free to dance, get a job, climb trees, jump out of trees, do any kind of activity, but you don't need a self behind it. You don't need an identity who does those things. It is just a doing. You just do it. It's very difficult to train ourselves in such a way so that the awareness can begin to see deeply into everything that happens in our life. When you're doing the dishes, when you're talking with your friends, your relatives, your mate, your coworkers, to see that there's fundamentally not a difference. To see that is just astonishing, because when we do that, that which thought it was a self, this is a relative way of saying it, begins to die, the ego. And another way of looking at it, when you actually see it, that it's a stone woman. It's a wooden man. It's not real. It's not that person you thought you were protecting and advancing and thinking needed to get approval. It's not real. And so the astonishing thing about it is, at the same time you see that it's not real. It's like it was made of stone. It's so unreal. Still, dancing happens all over the place, and the dancing is even more uninhibited or free or spontaneous or creative, because it's not operating out of hope and fear anymore. There's no longer an identity, a woman behind that or a man behind that situation, that dancing and that singing, that is concerned about what others think. In other words, am I doing okay? This is a stone man. It would have to be. Not that I'm perfectly happy to function as an individual, but it's discontinuous. I'm an individual just long enough to give this talk. When I step down off from this, and that whoever gave the talk is gone. They're no longer here. There's nothing being maintained. So therefore, how would you say that if you were Tozan? Nothing being maintained. There's no solid identity anywhere. He discovered this. Oh my. Now, what do I say? What do I say to my students? How would you teach something like that? He's using those images when the stone woman gets up dancing. The wooden man begins to sing. So at the same time, there's no sensitivity to it on the order of hope and fear. I hope they like my dancing or my singing, or I hope this or hope that, or fear that they won't. But I'm not saying there isn't some of that there, but it's not a lot. There's just enough there to keep the whole show running. There's some, but there's very little. So the next line there is, it is not within the reach of feeling or discrimination. How could it admit of consideration and thought? Basically saying, it's not within the reach of feeling. We're not discounting your feelings. We're not saying stop feeling. Although occasionally I say, if someone is tangled up in their feelings and I can see that their feelings are causing them problems rather than actually helping them, I say, I don't care how you feel. That doesn't mean that I don't care about you and I'm not concerned about the depth of your suffering. It just means that I'm saying that in such a way that if you think of me as your teacher, that you'll take a second look at that and see I have this intense feeling, and should I jump on the assumption that this feeling means that is happening, or this feeling is caused by that? Because if you do anything with the feeling, you cover it up or disguise it, or something like that happens. And what I'm saying is, you need to go and into the feeling, in that you're not separate from the feeling anymore. If a feeling arises, you are that feeling. It's not something happening to you. Just another way of saying the stone woman gets up dancing. Discontinuous identity. If the person, to talk about my own situation a little bit, which I don't often do, but if the person that woke up this morning in bed, not Onion, but me, was suddenly here and was giving this talk, I wouldn't be able to give a talk. I don't know how helpful that is, but it's like there's something discontinuous about that. It's happening to all of us all the time, except we, out of hope and fear, keep trying to stitch them together and make them into some kind of, and one of the comments that we have on it was, I used to feel this way, but now I'm feeling that way. Well, that should be a clue to you. It should be a clue that your emotions you can't depend on your identity. Very undependable. The only thing I really know of you can depend on, and that's only probably for a little while longer, and that's gravity. But that's fast becoming old-fashioned. Yes.
So just a minute ago, you said if a feeling arises, you are that feeling.
You're not separate from anything. So the way to work with, just like an enemy comes towards you, the best way to work with an enemy is don't separate yourself from that enemy by fighting with him or her. But you are the enemy. You are that. If you see it, the warfare is gone. I'm not saying you're suddenly going to be this cheerful fellow or woman walking around. You're so happy because you're at one with everything. I rarely say at one with everything. I very rarely say that we're all one. I don't think I ever say that. If I do, I quick cover it up. Act like I didn't say it. And the idea is it's not that there isn't a oneness happening. It's just that that's not particularly, ego is way too happy with that statement. We're all one. After all, we're all one. That ends the investigation because but if you say we're not separate, then the ego, the consciousness, the awareness wants to know, well, is that true? How are we separate? When we say we're all one, it's more like a statement of fact. Investigation doesn't happen. Questions? More?
Just to go back to that. So if we are that feeling that arises,
Not separate from it, yes.
so then does the agony begin when we separate from it?
It can get worse. If you try to blame someone, it might lighten up temporarily, but it creates a circularity that is very difficult to work. It's called samsara, cause and effect. And it not only happens in this lifetime, it has lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Where you could come back here, and I'm just going to make something up here, but you could come back and have the same issue with the same person over and over and over and over again. And the next thing I will say to you is don't believe a word I say. Don't believe anything. You don't really need to believe anything for it to be the case. Your belief or disbelief is extra. You don't need it. Just see what is true for yourself moment by moment. If you actually see what is true moment by moment, you don't ever need to talk to me again. Sheldon.
When he talks about what is this, the stone woman and the wooden man, is he talking about the same thing that Chogyam Trungpa talked about when he described the room that we build?
Keep going.
Of the five skandhas, we build a room from the five skandhas to solidify ourselves that we have a room.
Yeah.
Is he talking about the same thing?
Well, I can't check in with him, but it sounds like it. I don't know for sure, but there's a very, those resonate. We build up some kind of structure and then we say that that's something. But when we see what it actually is, it can still continue to sing or dance. It's just that the identity there is not real. But the dancing is just dancing dances. Singing sings. So, and of course there are vocal cords and there's a body that's in motion, dancing, but the actual identity situation is no more. And the way sometimes I say, and I can say now that if you want to know where your ego is, it's anywhere, any place where you feel sensitive about being criticized or sensitive about being praised. If you puff up a little bit when people comment or compliment you, or if you feel like you drop down a couple notches or get irritated when people are critical of you, whether they're right or wrong. But that whole area has to do with identity, because if the identity, if the belief in an identity, in other words, if you see that this so-called me is actually a wooden man, a stone woman, it doesn't stop you from dancing or singing. But when the dancing or singing is criticized, you see the dynamic between the person you see the person is talking out of an apparent self that is trying to find things right and find things wrong to promote themselves. Whereas you no longer have that problem. Jessica.
How do we?
Jesse.
How do we work with identities that are seemingly given to us, whether from individuals or institutions. How do we work with that without
Yeah, that's,
having one ourselves?
what you do is you practice and you work with that, but then towards the end it says, ministers serve their lords, children obey their parents. So you use the identity. I'm a Dharma teacher, but there's nobody here. And it's not a something to brag about. It's not something to be, you can tell if you talk to somebody whether they have an identity of a Dharma teacher or they think that stone woman is actually a real person that gets a lot of credit. It's really, you can sense that. So when you're a nurse, so when you just function as a nurse. Your function is to take care of people. And you'll notice that why it becomes so difficult is it becomes more and more clear when you see more clearly who you are and what you are and how you're just your function. It's very clear what other people are doing. Other people are, and some people are all about their identity. They're not really about, they're taking care of people, but it's really about them being the caretaker person. It's about the identity of looking like someone who's taking care of people. Have you noticed? And some people are just about making money. The shingle is out there. It says, we help people. But when it comes right down to it, if they were really helping people, you wouldn't put a time on a consultation, because that's like saying, oh, I can do anything that needs to happen in this length of time. And but because it's an economic consideration, they say, well, this is you get 45 minutes with this person for whatever your consultation is, 45 minutes or no, 45 minutes. So I've tried to do that. I just can't time anything like that. More.
Then how do we use that identity? How do we use that constraint put on us?
Just work within it. You'll see if you work within it and just, ministers serve their Lord. So the Lord is the Lord, the minister is the minister. The children obey their parents. So you just function within that. But if you don't, if your self-centeredness, if you can see that when you go back and look at the identity of someone who's functioning in that way, that it's non-existent. There is no solid being. So when you do that, then because you're no longer concerned about how well you're doing or what other people thinking about what you're thinking about what they're thinking, and all of those complicated mind games and traps, you're able to just take care of people. And when you find that the system is not working very well, you can just leave, go somewhere else. Yes.
So when you say children serve their parents as an example,
children obey their parents.
Children obey their parents. That's like me going to work and obeying my.
You could say that's relative truth. You made an agreement. You have a job, and so. But this doesn't mean that you can't begin through an awareness practice, begin to understand your life in a much, much deeper way. So that we have forms here that you follow too, but our understanding of forms here are much different. They're about awareness. They're not about necessarily about, certainly not about making money. Even though I know there's a fundraiser here, it probably sounds like people are not so happy about that maybe, but you got to do something. So you have to do a little bit of that. Whereas hospitals and so on and insurance companies are it's all about the corporate, it's greed basically, but put a name on it, it's just greed. So yes, go ahead. Is something unclear about how you function within a situation that sucks? Is that what it is?
Well, that serving your Lord.
Yes.
Right? I'm just trying to relate that to something practical, like going to work and serving the Lord, which would be the hospital system.
Yes, you would.
And all of the constructs and rules.
You've agreed to work there.
Yeah.
And so I work there, and then when because your primary, what you've been hired to do is to help people. When things start to get more tied up in making money or in your boss's identity or something like that. If you're more clear about what's happening, then you'll be more clear about conveying a message to them. This is not working. You can just be very, very direct about it. And if they say, well, that's too bad, that's what your job requires, then you can leave.
So it's like agreeing to work there wherever it is until you just don't agree to do it. And then
I think so. I mean, it's I can see where there's kind of a knot back there somewhere that is not real clear. So what would I would say, well, sit a lot. It really is true that if you practice, if you're very aware and you're in the threat to yourself or the feeling of, well, I don't want to, sometimes we'll say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's getting me, I'm not going to do that. They can't make me do that. We tend to get into that kind of thing rather than just see what is actually happening there. And then you see, well, can't do that. You might not even have the words, I can't do that, come up. You might just find yourself punching out for the last time, going somewhere else. Sure. I mean, we're having a conversation about it here, and it's easy for me to say you need a job. Then, there's so many, the causes and conditions that arise in that kind of a situation are so extensive. You have to make a living. You have a daughter. You can't just be, you can't just say, work out of some kind of idealism or something, or I'm not going to, they're just all about making money, then I'm not necessarily going to do that. You might have to do that for a while until you can find out another way to do it. What I've suggested to people come here over and over again, this young lady right here, what was your name again? And people who work in that kind of service situation where, like Senshu, she's talking to people all the time about, because she's a counselor, a therapist, social worker. I say, form your own. We've offered to say, use Sokukoji as a 501c3 and form another organization where we help people and don't put a time limit on it, and to actually focus on helping the person rather than just how do we make a lot of money here? How does everybody get rich? So I would think you should put your heads together and talk about that. I think it would be a wonderful thing for us to do. I don't know how to do that. Yes.
In the case with the time limits, isn't that just a business trying to function as a business?
Mm-hmm. It is. Say more.
It feels like there's a separation. Like there's a wanting to help people, but there also needs to be a form of a business. So the time limits aren't necessarily, to me, seem like a bad thing. It's that they have to have some kind of structure so it can continue to be. Okay,
so if you want to go into that, then I'll go into it. But we should look at each person. You should look at each person and put a little bit of time into looking at each person and see how much, and actually trust the therapist, trust him or her to just make that determination, rather than have an arbitrary thing where up in the front office, this is how long it takes, and this is what. If you're going to put that person, have that person working with this patient or client on a fundamental level about their life and about their sanity or insanity, then empower them to actually say something about that, so they have some power, so that they could actually say, this is the end of your interview. When I have an interview with some people, sometimes if it gets too rambly, I just bow. Doesn't happen too often. Usually I'm very interested in what people are saying, but occasionally. But I don't have, there's other places where they'll knock on your door a few times and make it, a soft kind of approach. Knock once and then wait for 3 minutes, and then knock again and then wait a minute, and then knock again and open the door slightly, and then open the door and stand in the doorway like this. So finally the person there gets the idea. So I would say yes. Again, middle way. Find a middle way that respects always concern, takes into consideration the client and trying to help them, and also that there is a time frame. So I'm not stepping out. I'm not saying free for all, but I would use the counseling person. And then that counseling person might even say, I don't think this person needs to come as often. Or you could actually talk to interact with the client in a way that handles that time situation differently. But usually you don't have, you just have to do what they say. Basically, somebody comes in and you have to see them for 45 minutes and then you see the next person. So you're kind of stuck with that. Yes.
A question from Chigme up in Traverse City.
Yes, Chigme.
He says, it seems that obeying supports the solidification of the self and separateness. How can I obey and still have space to meet what arises?
So obeying, this is coming out centuries and centuries ago. So we're not, these days, we don't necessarily think of it as obeying. But, if it's a child and you have parents, you need to do what your parents say. I know there's no other way to work that out. And in terms of a job or functioning with an employer, you'd have to, that's just in the mundane world where it seems that we have to work. In some countries, in ancient India, where the Buddha was, he had an incredible society there that supported the Jains and the Hindus, and they had a really strong spiritual context for everything. If you went on a spiritual path there, the whole community supported you and thought you and admired you and looked up to you and supported you and gave you enough to eat. Whereas here, you're called a homeless person rather than a holy person. I'm not sure how much that helps, Jigme, but it's just very simple. It just there's a mundane situation. We have to work with that. So we have to, and then our spiritual path or our awareness practice, we have to make sure we spend time on that so that the awareness starts to leak over into that everyday situation. It's difficult for us, especially in this society.
Question from Chuck in Minneapolis.
Yes, Chuck.
When we leave a retreat, our mind has a different feel to it. When we get home, it changes. What is going on here?
I think it's a little different for each person, but quite often, and Chuck's, you've been sitting for a number of years, and so the idea of being in retreat, we're trying to, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I'm saying quite often if you're in retreat, and whether it's a group retreat or a strict solitary retreat, your mind tends to soften up and slow down, and less speediness, a little more natural equanimity starts to happen. And you could say maybe even less warfare. And then we go back into our everyday situation. Then we start to get triggered by the things that are there. And it starts to, it's like there's some coals there that get fanned. And suddenly we have these flames build back up of, being irritated by this. Or suddenly, then we have this contrast of, when I was in retreat, everything was so smooth. And now I'm back into my everyday situation and I'm feeling put upon by everything. So what's happening here, and this will happen for a while until the realization of no self begins to show up. No self, no other. No self, no other people, just not separate. And until that happens, the path quality seems to be difficult. There's this contrast between practicing and starting to get some insight into just basic equanimity or balance, and then coming back into the mundane world, our everyday kitchen sink level, and starting to get to feel the abrasiveness of that, you could say. So what is happening is, near as I can, hopefully I can say this in a way that's helpful, is that there is an assumption going on. Perhaps you could reflect on this yourself. There's an assumption going on that by being in meditation retreat that you can develop or secure or establish or reify a state of mind that has a natural balance, so that you take that into your everyday life, that natural balance will happen. The problem is the natural balance quality that has happened there is actually a relative state of mind. Awakening is not a state of mind. It's no mind. Heartbreaking to hear that. because you can't really accomplish awakening. It's the end of striving. It's the end of struggle. And this means that whenever struggle comes up, whether it's at the kitchen sink or in the meditation hall, or talking with friends, neighbors, sangha, the struggle, the difficulty, or the frustration may still be there, but there's just a stone woman or wooden man. So they aren't going to bite on that idea or that phrase that sometimes runs through our head. Oh, there I go again. I'm back to this stuff again. And it used to be this way, now it's this way. When in actuality, through awareness practice, we begin to see that there's no separation between sitting in the Zendo, sitting facing the wall for day after day after day, and washing dishes or talking with your neighbor, talking with your mate. But it is, to further comment, it's difficult. It's especially difficult to do long periods of practice and come back into our everyday situation and feel like I'm just not gonna be able to do this. It's not working. What am I doing wrong? And you're doing it exactly right. What I would say as your mentor or your cheerleader, I would say just keep going. Just keep going. If you want to know what to do, come and see me. I will tell you. Please keep going. I did. But it can get very difficult when you get to and you think, well, I've been doing this, and we start to add up and we say, well, I've been up here, I've been through this path, I've been through this part, this was really difficult. And we have the memory of all the work we've done and all the retreats we've been on and all the studying we've done. And we have an assumption, well, I should be there now. I should have this down. And that actually is like getting off the path and writing a memoir or something. I've done this and I've done that. Again, not accusing anyone of anything, but I would just say, just keep practicing. When those kind of feelings come up, that is awareness. It's actually awareness that sees that contrast, and that's so valuable. Because you will see that contrast until it will just completely collapse. It's called no self, but it's called a stone woman. It's just there's not a real identity there. Yes, Sheldon.
Is this the significance of nothing happens?
Yes. Of course, there's things happening, but the insight is because there's nothing separate, nothing can fundamentally happen. I'm moving my hand. Jesse's moving her hand. Ryan's moving his hand. You're blinking your eyes. But fundamentally, nothing happens. More?
What makes it so hard to want to have something happen?
What makes it what?
What makes it so hard? What makes it so prevalent that we want something to happen?
We want things to be different than they are. So we keep grasping or clinging or running after imaginary goals. But like I say, what you're looking for, you're looking at. Just look right at your life. Look at what's on the end of your fork. That's a line from William Burroughs, who wrote Naked Lunch. You read that? You should read it. It's not a book on meditation at all. So the encouragement here is to through the Sokuzan mind and through what I'm saying is just continue. Find a way in which you can continue through for the rest of your life to strengthen that which sees and not necessarily fuel that which thinks. Don't get rid of that which thinks. That would be like, wanting to walk on water. That's not going to happen. But you could put more energy into just what is it? What question is always wonderful because it won't necessarily produce anything other than sense data. What is this? Well, it's, human beings, a room, black, red, very simple to take that approach. Other questions, either from off in the distance or here in the room? Please? So everything made complete sense? Good. Yes, Sokuzan.
Do you ever use the assumption of a self to support the practice? It seems difficult to just become a wooden man or a stone woman.
Good question. Yeah, you don't try to become a wooden man or try to become a stone woman. So that's not what it's just saying that's how it may look as you go along. What will happen is it will be there and it won't be. To say so Tozan Ryokai, probably guessing here, probably couldn't think of a good image other than, well, it's like it doesn't exist, but yet it does. And then how would you say, my way of saying it's discontinuous, it kind of comes and goes. So you're there and you feel like there's a self, especially if you're not feeling very good, then immediately there's somebody who's having that feeling. Have you noticed that? Yeah, it's unreal. It's not real. The feeling itself is a suspect, but the self is the being that is there having that feeling is the one that we're always trying to support and protect and promote, and is sensitive to other people's ideas and opinions.
So do you use, as long as we're functioning out of relativity, is there a way to use that ego to support our awakening?
What I would say is don't get in the way of it. So we don't use it to support it, because that's more trying to figure out a way to make that work in our favor. But don't object to it. Objecting to us, trying to get rid of an imaginary self, uses a lot of energy goes into that. So if you're walking along and you're interacting with some people and you leave the coffee shop or whatever, and you think back and you think, I was really ego. All I talked about was myself, or really self-centered. I've got to stop being so self-centered and try to be something else. When I would say, don't do anything with it. No comment at all. To have, it's a very interesting thing to have an emotion come up that is quickly followed by the words, I'm so self-centered. But experiment a little bit with having an emotion come up without labeling it anything, without calling it self-centeredness. See what actual narcissism, if you want to use that fancy word, see what that is like before you label it. Because then the awareness is going down into the substrate, the actual structure, going down into the basement of ego, and seeing, how is this functioning? Where's this getting its heat from? Where, are there any, is there a root cellar down here? Probably not. Lots of mice running around. So it's the idea of just not getting in the way of it. Don't try to get rid of it. Just try to see what it is. So it would be serving you in the sense that it's something for you to really look at and not necessarily push down or fluff up. Once you do that, then it comes and goes. Sometimes you could feel quite egotistical, but since it's not real, other people might think, what an ass that guy is. I thought he was a meditation teacher. And here he is, all bent out of shape and pissed off and wandering around like a grizzly bear. But you're just, sure, there's self-centeredness happens there, but you're no longer intimidated by what occurs to you. More? I have more to say, but I
sometimes we use characteristics that we describe ourselves to say, well, I'm just a stubborn person, so I'm going to do this. And it sounds fishy. It sounds like I'm going to use my ego to do this. And eventually, you know, initially that might work, but eventually it kind of crumbles. So what do we use as inspiration to practice when we can't use those props we give ourselves?
Well, you already do quite a bit of it. Just be stubborn about it. Follow. We have a structure here. Do it. You set up a schedule for yourself so that you practice, if that's what you're talking about.
It seems like the stubbornness is going to fail at some point because it's still based on me being stubborn.
It is.
So when that motivation is not enough, is there something we can use to inspire us to continue our practice?
In this tradition, you should use the devotion to the lineage, devotion to the teacher, devotion to the Sangha. This is why the first thing we say is refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha, the 16 precepts. They take refuge in the Buddha as the example of someone who is sane, not a deity. Just because we have wooden images doesn't, it's a chunk of wood. Refuge in the Dharma is the truth that he taught. Everything is dependently arisen. There's no separate beings anywhere. And refuge in the Sangha, the community of people, including the teacher, who are all trying to understand and trying to support each other. That's what we're doing here, is trying to support an open, sane, clear, even reasonable way of living, rather than some kind of highfalutin, everybody's, sprouts wings. Good. And warm? It's good.
Not yet.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah.
You were saying that before we put the label on the feeling.
Yes.
And it seems like that's like an instantaneous thing. It's like the feeling comes in and we just instantly know what it is, or at least it seems like it is for me a lot of times. So how do we? There's space there. There has to be, or how are we going to get in between that? And how do we get to that space? And how do we make it bigger?
Right on a cushion. But you have to do a lot of it. An hour a day is nice, but probably needs to be more than that. And that's why we have retreats. So it's apparently we are not naturally just here and present and not at war with things. We have difficulty. And so to find some space, first start out with the space between your thoughts. Start out with the space between you and the wall. Start looking at space so that you're kind of changing your conditioning, so that you're reprioritizing your life to look at what is it that arises and what is the space that it arises in. Rather than, I don't like that, I can get rid of that, I got to get more of that. Kind of ignoring the space unless it gets crowded, and then you just bust out a wall and let stuff fall off the side of the building. Anything else? Okay. I would just say, just keep going. Keep going. Same. It's hard to know what else to say. That's why we have a temple. That's why we have a teaching. That's why I come in here several times a week and talk. I might even meditate once in a while, but unlikely. You should ask me, why don't you meditate more?
Why don't you meditate more?
I don't feel like it. You could say, well, I don't feel like meditating either. And I said, well, don't meditate. Go do something else. But if you're suffering and you're having difficulty with your life and you're at war with yourself deep down, this might be a good thing for you to do. Is the whole sit down, find some time in your life once a day to sit down and just don't do anything, but just watch what continues to move. very, very revealing. Even outside of Buddhism, and Buddhists don't particularly believe in anything anyway. But the Buddha understood or discovered something about the nature of being a living being, that when other people practiced or studied what he did and realized it themselves, it had such a powerful effect on them that it just transformed their whole life. And a lot of people, that's why we have this lineage. That's why we chant all those names. I deliberately want to do that. Not that those are exactly the people. There's probably half a dozen of them in there that don't even exist. Doesn't matter. It's the idea of lineage, human lineage. Here's someone started this, said all things are dependently arisen, and right down through the centuries, we've got 2,500 years of this. So the bloodline of the lineage is a good thing to emphasize for us. Just like I'll be gone, someone else will do this, hopefully. And then that person will be gone. Someone else will do this if the world lasts long enough. So we need to have that kind of family. It's not the family necessarily that you were born into, but it's a family of like-minded people who are trying to understand this, what it fundamentally is, and not just have a belief in something and some kind of a savior principle. Not wrong. There's some people that have to approach their path that way. They're totally on the right path for them. So space, sit down and actually look at the whole idea of what arises in space and how we actually believe that. We actually believe that that's true. Relative truth. Other questions from anybody out that looks like they're hiding behind somebody else? Yes.
Here's a question from Sandru.
Sandru.
How does the energy of thinking, emotion, not the content, relate to awareness?
So he's asking he's separating it out a little bit and saying the energy. How does that go again? The energy.
How does the energy of thinking, emotion, not the content,
not the content,
relate to awareness?
Okay, it's just rising in awareness. It's also an object. So, and the way it relates to it is it just. And the example I would use here would be that everybody's have an emotion without any. One of the best ones probably is if you have a feeling and you wake up in the morning and you feel depressed. And you have no real words, nothing really fits it, but you may have that, and some people are chronic, have that. They just have it all the time. And then sometimes we might have that once in a while, some feeling of an emotion or something of being, I'm just using this as an example. You can also have a feeling of being just irritable that doesn't have any, you're just looking for somebody to blame. You just look and you just feel. So it's just Trungpa Rinpoche. I hesitate to use this, but I would use it since my teacher used it. But I don't think it's exactly this. So I don't disagree with him, but I also don't completely agree. I think it's jumping the gun. He called it high-speed thought. That emotion is like high-speed thought. It's really intense thinking. So it doesn't. And I've been listening to that for 40 years. And looking at it on the cushion in my own situation. I think there's probably a better way of saying it. Maybe Sandra, maybe you can come up with a way.
Ask him there.
Sandra, you better get busy. But it's a very good question. So here you have to use the image. You have awareness, and the thinking comes up in there about this and that. I like it. I don't like it. It's good. I shouldn't. I should. And then we have an emotion come up that doesn't have a lot of clothing. It's just kind of a raw, damp, or wet, or cloudy, or musty emotion that doesn't have a story. And ego or self-centeredness, or the me feeling, kind of wants to find something to pin that on. So we will actually abandon the very object that should be just investigated. So that would be a way of talking about it. When it arises, insofar as you can, don't interpret it. Don't immediately start writing a short story about that emotion. Just stay with the emotion and go into the texture of it. Use the awareness that you are strengthening on the cushion to go down into the texture of that feeling. I don't know if I'm looking at Sandro in New York or in Texas. He's never really let me know where he's at right now. If I didn't know better, I would think he was a Scorpio. Yes.
There's a question from Anna Maria.
Yes. I know her.
Oh, and Sandra just sent over a text saying not likely.
Not likely. Oh, I feel so informed.
So Anna Maria, a little bit ago you said wanting things to be other than what they are. Seems, quote, what they are, end quote, is elusive. And what I occasionally see as a truth that I'm turning from is not reliable. What is the absolute what they are?
Not separate. If you see that not only the false identity that you thought you were, the ego, and the imitation or makeshift or elusive or relative identity of others, we're not separate from any of that. You don't have to get rid of anything. It's not separate. You actually are looking at yourself. When I say looking at yourself, of course, looking at everything else, but there's some kind of recognition that begins to happen where you see that we're fundamentally not separate, and that starts to become more important than the apparent separation. So therefore, and one of the ways this shows up is when someone comes at, I've used this example many times, that someone comes at you with some aggression, and instead of looking for your defenses, looking for some way to defend yourself or to justify something or fend them off or something, you may still do that to protect yourself. But you actually see deeply, you see that what's motivating that is their own hope and fear and their own distress. They are looking for some place to blame. And even if you have triggered something by your activity, quite often the intense feeling or emotion or blaming that's coming your direction is coming out of their own karma, their own makeup, their own 8 consciousnesses, or their alaya vijnana that has not been investigated. If you don't investigate this, you'll project it on others. And you'll actually think, all they're really doing maybe is triggering something, but then you have a big accusation or intense emotions about whatever they're doing or not doing. Everyone here has experienced this in some way or another. We all do it. And so it's not a matter of stopping that. It's more which is what we quite often try to do, is stop the feeling. It's more a matter of actually investigate it. Get very forensic about your own emotional dynamics. Get very, very curious about how is it that jealousy comes up when this happens, or how is it that I get angry over this situation or that situation. Look at what triggers the actual storyline or emotionally charged story.
Follow-up from Sandro.
Yes.
He's in New York.
Yes.
And he has another question too.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
He says, isn't the ebb and flow of energy before the story awareness?
Anytime anything is ebbing and flowing, it's in the awareness. It's still separate. It's separated out. It's something that we see. Anytime anything is changing, it's still a relative situation. Awareness is not particularly relative. And of course, it's relative. You have there's a sixth sense fields, and there's an awareness of one of the objects arising in any one of those sixth sense fields. But there's something that actually begins to go beyond that. If you look closely at what is arising, it's called transcendence. This is what Tozan Ryokai is trying to point out by saying the wooden man gets up singing, the stone woman begins to dance. He's trying to show you that relative truth is not what it's cracked up to be. Any other really cool questions? Oh. Okay, we can close. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
May there this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi shi shi-son mu sa mo-ko sa mo-ko ja-ho-ro-mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita,